Done.
Yeah. So it's live streaming now, so you can start the meeting at 7 o'clock.
Yep. Okay. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Children and Education Scrutiny Committee. I would like to start by welcoming those members of the public and press who are watching the live stream of this meeting through the Council's YouTube page. Due to government guidance on social distancing, this meeting is taking place remotely in accordance with current legislation, which makes provision for remote attendance at and remote access to council meetings. The meeting is also following Peterborough City Council's virtual meeting protocol. In order for this meeting to run smoothly, I ask that members and participants keep your video cameras switched on with your microphone muted, except when you are invited to speak. If you wish to speak, then please raise the virtual hand, which is either blue and is located at the bottom of the participants section, or yellow and is located in the reaction section. Whichever version you are using, please ensure you use the raised hand function to indicate that you wish to speak. Please be patient if you're not invited to speak as soon as you have raised your hand, as there may be other people wishing to speak before you. The Democratic Services team will be monitoring the participants list to see if anyone has dropped out of the meeting, and will try and connect you to provide assistance to rejoin the meeting if this should happen. If we run into technical problems, I ask for your patience. Should this occur, an adjournment of the meeting will be declared while the fault is addressed, and the public broadcast will be paused. If it's not possible, the meeting will be adjourned until such time as it can be reconvened. Finally, I would remind members that all virtual meetings are recorded. Before we move on to the first item on the agenda, I'll begin by taking a roll call of all Scrutiny Committee members to establish your presence. When your name is called out, please unmute the microphone and confirm that you are in attendance. Thank you. Paulina.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Aiken.
Present.
Councillor Casey.
Present.
Councillor Coles.
Present, Paulina.
Councillor Dowson.
Present, but may I just have a word about keeping the video on? I've been advised, because I've got a Chromebook, that both my voice and the video can't be combined together, apparently, or it comes over. So occasionally, if I'm speaking of any length, I'll have to turn the video off. Okay?
That's absolutely fine, Councillor Dowson, and that's, yes, please do that. Thank you. Councillor Haynes.
Present.
Councillor Lane.
Present.
Councillor Over.
Present.
Councillor Robinson.
Good evening. Present.
Councillor Rush.
Present.
Councillor Skibstead.
Present.
Statutory Education Co-opted members in attendance are Flavio Vites.
Present.
Peter Countley.
Present.
Claire Watchorn.
Present.
And the following independent co-opted members are also in attendance: Alistair Kingsley.
Present.
Rizwan Rahmatullah.
Present.
Just to note that Councillor Day is expected this evening, but she will be running a little late. Also in attendance is Wendy Ogle-Wellborn, Executive Director, People and Communities, who will be supporting the committee as lead officer. Councillor Ayres, Cabinet Member for Children and Children's Services, Education, Skills and University, who is in attendance with officers presenting their reports. So thank you, Chairman.
Right.
Over to you.
Okay, thanks, Paulina. We'll now move on to agenda item 1. apologies for absence. Paulina, have we any apologies?
Yes, we do, Chair. Parish Councillor Susie Lucas and Parish Councillor Dr. Sridhar have both submitted their apologies for this evening's meeting.
Okay, thank you. We're on now to agenda item 2. Do any members of the committee have any declarations of interest or whipping declarations? Nope, no. We now move to agenda item 3, minutes of the Children Education Scrutiny meeting held on the 21st of January 2021, pages 3 to 10 of the agenda. Can I ask if any member who does not agree that the minutes are a true record of the meeting, click the raised hand function on your screen now. I see no objections, so we will take it that the minutes are agreed. We will now move on to agenda item 4, call-in of any cabinet members or key officer decisions.
We don't have any call-ins for this evening's meeting, Chair.
Okay. We'll now move on to item 5, annual children's social care statutory complaints report 2019 to 20, pages 11 to 28 of the agenda. And I'd like to welcome Belinda Evans, Customer Services Manager, who is in attendance to present this report. Thanks, Belinda.
Good evening committee members. I'm here to present the annual report for statutory children's social care complaints from 2019-20. I'm just going to go through the highlights. As you can see on page 18, the number of complaints accepted remained largely the same as the previous year. Many complaints are declined as ineligible as the matter is being considered in court or because the person complaining does not meet the eligibility criteria. Timescales for responding to complaints were within acceptable parameters until the final month, which was March 2020, when several complaints were delayed due to the impact of the pandemic on the service. On page 20, there's a table showing 40% of complaints were partially upheld and over 30% were fully upheld. By accepting responsibility for service delays and putting things right, the majority of complaints are resolved at that first stage. Only 10% of cases escalated, leading to 6 conciliation meetings, 4 of which were successful in resolving the complaint. A total of 4 cases requested independent investigation, but only 1 of these has been concluded so far. There was only 1 stage 3 panel held, which later escalated to the Ombudsman, who then declined to investigate and has not investigated any complaints in 2019-20 for children's social care, which is a really good result. I would also like to highlight the increasing number of compliments made about the service. Some examples of these are given on Appendix C on page 27. So those are the main highlights, and I'd invite your questions.
Right, I'd ask the committee members if they have any questions and remind them that they will need to raise their their raised hand function to indicate if they wish to speak. Right, where are we now? Peter Countley.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of the service improvements and actions taken following complaints listed in Appendix B, there are numerous reminders to social workers that are referred to, but can we be assured that there is a more integrated and systematic pursuit of these needed improvements in relation to quality assurance, monitoring, appraisal, and staff training? And then in relation to Appendix C, it will be helpful to understand how the good practice that's been recorded in the compliments listed is disseminated more widely in a staff training context to help further strengthen the quality of the service.
Thank you. Normally, we hold quarterly performance meetings with the department, so I would attend them as would the quality assurance lead. And that's where the programme of improvements is discussed and implemented. Now, over this last year, unfortunately, we've not had any monitoring of these improvement programmes because the performance meetings that we usually attend have been postponed. So I've not had any opportunity to discuss that or monitor those improvements over this last 12 months.
Okay. Right, okay, thanks, Peter. Next one on my list is Councillor Aiken.
Thank you, Chair. Belinda, referring to the figure 3 on page 20, so I have a couple of questions. First of all, just looking at the figures, the children in care, leaving care figures, I was obviously picking those out because they seem quite high. Obviously, number of complaints 30, but partially upheld and upheld, that's obviously sort of more than half. And I just wondered whether there was a pattern in those complaints, whether you'd sort of investigated each one and whether there was a theme running through them. And also with regards to sort of partially upheld, 31 as the total, 41% seems to be quite high. My second question would be relating to figure 3, that particular table, but also on page 22, you have another table, accessibility, and at the bottom, the total for 2019-2020, the total is 80, which is different from the total that you have in the table on page 20, which is 75. And I just wondered whether that should actually be the same total, why there is a difference. So if you could just explain that for me, that would be good. Thank you.
Yeah, if I can take that last one first, the number of 75 is the number of stage ones that received a response. The number of complaints that we accepted was 80, and we have the informals and the ones that were withdrawn, so they didn't have a response. And then I think there was one that came straight in at stage 2, which complainants can request. If they don't want the department to respond to their complaint at all, they can go straight to stage 2. We also sometimes get inquiries from the Ombudsman that have not gone through our complaints process at all because we've rejected them, and we then give the customer the right to go to the Ombudsman to challenge that. And sometimes the Ombudsman will come to us to request information, which we then need to log as a complaint and respond to them, but we won't actually respond to the complaint by the customer, if that makes sense. So that's the discrepancy in the numbers. So the 75 is those that have actually had a stage 1 response from the department in the year in question. Going to the numbers of upheld, and you were referring to the children in care team particularly, and leaving care. It's actually seen as something that we're quite pleased about, that we get a lot of complaints from young people, because this process is designed to be used by young people and children. So in a lot of councils, the complaints are mainly made by parents and adults, and they have less success in making sure that young people can access this complaints process. So that's something that we've done quite well over the last few years. So we do get a number of complaints from children in care and leaving care. And the uphold rate is, if you, I think it was page 20 you said, wasn't it, is reflective of the uphold rate across the whole service. So 40% partially upheld, 30% upheld. And a high uphold rate is actually an indication of an open and learning organisation, so we can find fault with ourselves. So when a complaint comes to us, we don't investigate it in my department, it's investigated by the service. So we log the complaint and pass it over to the service. So they're, that team manager for that service is actually looking at what's been raised by the parent or child or young person, and they will then respond to them. And often there will be elements that are, eligible and therefore, have been upheld because there has been delays in responding to a young person's request for a callback or a visit, that sort of thing. So normally those factors would be fed into that performance meeting, and we would then be looking at the themes, and we would be looking at the the improvements that we could draw from that. But we haven't been able to do that in the current year because of the pandemic and the fact that the performance meetings have been postponed. So I can't give you any more accurate sort of analysis this year than we would normally be able to do in previous years.
Okay, I guess what I just wondered is there a pattern to the types of complaints that you receive, or are they just all random? Is there what I would class as a theme going through them that that you've needed to rectify?
A lot of the time it is people not receiving as much information as they need to understand the process. It's sometimes that they aren't getting reports and minutes of meetings as quickly as they need to be able to review them before important other meetings or court appearances and things like that. For young people, it can be, we've had situations where children have not wanted to leave the placement that they are due to leave for various reasons. And sometimes that's put on hold while that's investigated, so they're kept where they are. Sometimes it will be a simple thing such as, an argument between young people at a foster placement, and, a pair of trainers was bought once to compensate a young person for that some lost clothing. So it's really random, actually. There's lots of different things that young people will bring to our attention, some quite minor and some quite more important. So it is very varied.
No, that's good. Thank you very much. That gave me a good overview of that. Thank you.
Thank you. Next on my list is Al Kingsley.
Thanks, Chair, and hi, Belinda. Thank you for your report. Hopefully a relatively easy one. Looking at the complaints categories on page 23 of the report, you've provided some reassurance that the numbers are fairly consistent with last year overall. I just wondered if you had any insight as to whether the weightings by categories had changed much year on year. And just a follow-up to that, if I may, sorry, I'm going to overload you, but you've got a section on service improvements in your Annex B. I just wondered, in that, were there any that were carryovers from previous years, similar actions that needed to be done again?
So with regard to the categories, they are very similar. So the delayed failed is always the highest category for all of our complaint processes. So we've got the corporate and our adult social care and there's children's social care statutory process that we manage in my team, and virtually all of them come out with sort of 50% at least that would be delayed failed service, because it's quite a catch-all for lots of different things, from delays in getting documents to phone calls being returned and all sorts of things like that. So that is fairly consistent with and as the numbers are very similar to last year, they're virtually the same in terms of 40 plus delayed failed service, about 10 staff conduct type complaints. So that was very much the same. With regard to the service improvements, I've tried to pull out ones that I thought were, quite interesting and specific. So, there will be things like reminding people to call back, or, the issue about giving notice. I think there was one about giving notice for meetings. One that was quite new, I think, was the equipment upgrade in the children's home. And the issue about handovers, that came up a couple of times this year, and we haven't seen that specifically before. Traditionally, we've had quite a lot of complaints about changes in social worker, just the number of social workers. But this year we had a couple of complaints from young people unhappy with the fact that the next social worker wasn't familiar enough with their case, and they were having to sort of relive things that they'd rather not talk about with the next social worker because they hadn't, sufficiently familiarised themselves with the case. So that is a particular one that the team manager in that service has looked to improve and put a process in place to make sure of.
Thank you. I raised it because if the majority are new, that's a good reflection that last year's suggestions haven't repeated, so they've been embedded.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks. Thank you. Councillor Skipshead, please.
Thank you, Chair. So my question is about so you've on page 25. You've talked about the actions taken following complaints, and so my first question is, what is the impact of training on the complaints? How do you monitor that? And yeah, I know you have the quarterly. Was it quarterly? But what impact has it had, and has it changed anything in terms of those complaints? The other question was relating to what we just been talking about, those delay failure. We're wondering why those categories are put together, delays and failures in the same category, because it sounds like they're quite different things. So those are my two questions.
So with regard to the training, it's not something I can answer because that's something that's organised by the quality assurance team. So I don't know if Wendy would be aware of what is currently happening with, briefings and workshops that the quality assurance team would usually roll out with the service. It's not something my service are involved in. But with regard to the second question, which was about delayed failed service, it's a sort of national category that we use across the country. So I think it just groups together a lot of things that, are not specifically identified elsewhere.
Okay.
I mean, what I did do a couple of years ago is a more detailed analysis of delayed failed service, and that's something we're hoping to do again when we've got more opportunity to do more monitoring and analysis.
Okay. Is Wendy able to answer something about the impact of the training?
Yes, can do, Chair.
Okay, Wendy.
That's okay. So the quality assurance service picks up themes from not only complaints but also their audits. So we have a very comprehensive audit program where there's peer audits but also audits from our quality assurance unit. So using the findings from the audits and using the findings from complaints and other things as well, other feedback as well, the training programs that are developed that are rolled out to the team managers and the staff as well. And I think you do have a unit up in Williams as well. So make sure news service director has on that so we can give you a bit more detail.
Wendy, are you on a Chromebook as well?
No.
Oh, well, you're just breaking up a little bit. We'll see how it goes. But
right, okay. I'll move myself around a bit. Get what I said?
I did kind of miss the last little bit, I have to say.
I'll make sure that in Lou's service director report at the next committee that he includes a bit more detail on that.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor Coles.
Thank you, Chair and Belinda. Thank you very much for the report. I'd also like to turn to page 23 and the complaint categories. My interest is in the staff attitude and conduct complaints. I suppose any organisation that deals with people in extremis, you would tend to expect rather more than 10 or 11 complaints. So I'm just wondering how serious the level of complaint is to reach the attitude conduct, and if you've got any further detail about who's complaining and what's happening with staff there in terms of their support once these happen.
So this was the number that so when we get a complaint from a parent or a young person about social care, it can be, you know, a myriad of things. And we will only mark it as staff attitude conduct if that's the only or the main thing that they're complaining about. So if they really don't have a good relationship with their social worker, this can often be what they will claim, is that the conduct or the attitude of the social worker is not good. That doesn't mean we uphold those complaints, and we did analysis a few years ago when the numbers were higher than this, as to whether that was the case, whether they were being upheld and what we were doing about it, and they weren't largely being upheld, but you know, the numbers have gone down. So what we've tried to do is make sure that if we get a complaint and it has an element of my social worker didn't listen to me, you know, but there are lots of other things, and the majority of those are more significant, we will log the complaint as a different category. And if we, at the end of the complaint, we realise that the only thing that's been upheld is a different category, we will change the category so that it's more reflective of what we've actually found. So you know, it's not a high number. You know, across the council, I'd say we have a lot more of these types of complaints in other areas, such as council tax and bins and that sort of thing. So in social care, this is quite a low number, really, for when you think of the sort of contentious sort of subject matter in terms of, I mean, it should be recognised it's still about 70% of our complaints are from adults, parents, people that may not want the involvement of social care. So for the staff attitude conduct to be at that level is better than it's been in the past, and I think it's a reflection of how well the service manages these things.
Thank you very much. Would you suggest it's because of our success in having more permanent staff, so there's more of a team who are
definitely seen improvements, definitely that we're not getting as many complaints from people saying that they've had multiple changes of social worker. We're not getting a rise in complaints, which other councils are seeing in social care. I met with other complaint managers on Tuesday for the Eastern region, and they're all seeing increasing numbers of children's complaints. And the stability of the workforce has made a big difference, I think, you know, from my perspective in children's social care.
Thank you very much indeed.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Haynes, please, and that will be the last question on this item.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Belinda. You referred to the impact that March 2020 had on your ability to respond to complaints promptly, and it says about you should respond within 10 days, 10 working days, and a maximum of 20 if a delay is unavoidable. Until March 2020, it had been 15 days, and I was just wondering if you can clarify by response what does that mean? Does it mean holding email to say we're looking into it, or is that an actual outcome to the complaint? And what is it that's maybe standing in the way of responding quicker? Is it that the nature of the complaints is complex, or is it sort of lack of resources? Is there anything you can do to speed that up? Thank you.
Well, as I said before, the complaints are actually answered by the team manager of the service that the complaint's about. So my team will acknowledge the complaint, and they will send an acknowledgement out to the customer, often by email, because a lot of our complaints come in by email, within 3 working days. The team manager then gets the complaint and has until we give them a 10 working day deadline to work to, and sometimes that, you know, there'll be delays because the team manager will be on leave, or the team manager needs to speak to a social worker that's not available. So there's a variety of reasons why they won't be able to hit that 10-day time scale. Sometimes it is the complexity of the matter that they've got to look into. So the 10 or 15 day, 20 day, you know, parameters, of which they've done an average of 15 for the year up until March, is a full written response. So that is what is happening within 15 working days on average for that year. So that's a better turnaround than we've had in previous years when it was nearer to 20. So it is an improvement, and you know, it's still quite a good turnaround compared to some of our other complaints processes, which actually give a longer time scale.
Okay, thank you. If there are no further questions, I'd like to note the recommendations in the report, which is for the committee to consider and make recommendations for further scrutiny if deemed appropriate. Is the committee satisfied that we have done this, and are there any further recommendations that we wish to make? Please indicate by raising your virtual hand if you object to the recommendation or wish to make further recommendations. I cannot see any objections, so the recommendation is agreed. I'd like to thank Belinda for an excellent report, and you can leave the meeting if you wish, but I can understand if you want to stay till about 9 o'clock and listen to everything.
I might go and eat.
Might go and eat. All right. Okay. Thanks a lot. Thank you.
Evening.
We'll now move on to agenda item 6, Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Safeguarding Children Partnership Board Annual Report 2019-20, pages 29 to 58 of the agenda. I would like to welcome Joanne Proctor, Head of Service, Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Safeguarding Board, who is in attendance to present this report.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me to attend this evening. Hopefully everybody can hear me okay. I'm not on a Chromebook, so I'm hoping it's okay. The report that I brought for your attention this evening is very, very out of date now and very retrospective. In fact, while I was looking at this evening to refresh it for myself, I was thinking I'm about to start writing the next annual report. So I will just kind of pull out some of the highlights from this because it is a very retrospective report of the partnership. We bring it to scrutiny every year for both yourselves and for your Cambridgeshire equivalents for information purposes, so you can see the work of the partnership and what's happened within the year that we're reporting on. Legislation and government guidance does stipulate to us quite clearly what we have to have within the report and what we need to report on. And I can confirm that the independent scrutineer, Russell Waite, has checked the contents of the report and has confirmed that it does meet everything that we need to statutorily. For those of you who saw the report last year, you may remember that we've done a slimlined version last year, which met with favour at both ends of the county. So we've continued with that, with the version that you see in front of you. And again, at the other end, that they were very happy with that approach again. It has been through the Children's Committee at Cambridgeshire, so it's just come to yourselves this evening for information purposes. And just some main highlights really is that from 2019, which is obviously the period covered within the report, the 4 areas that we chose to focus on as a partnership were on neglect, child sexual abuse, child criminal exploitation, and learning from what was the serious case reviews. One of the real things I think that was a strength from 2019, but it's actually continued up until now actually, is around our work with the community safety partnerships. So there was a period of time where some of the statutory boards were working quite a lot in silo, but certainly since 2019 and actually ongoing now to now, that relationship between those boards has really, really improved to the extent that our child criminal exploitation scrutiny committee is actually, I chair it myself, but it's actually a joint group that we share with the community safety partnerships, as is our domestic abuse and strategic sexual violence board. So I think it just shows really some of that partnership working and how we've really tried to align kind of the priorities across the partnerships. The other thing that you may have seen was that historically, you'll be aware that one of the statutory duties for the partnership boards was to undertake what were referred to as serious case reviews. These were case reviews that we undertook if a child had died as a result of abuse or neglect, or had been very seriously abused and neglected. And it appeared that there was some learning that came out of multi-agency learning that came from the circumstances surrounding the incidents. Those are still in place, but they are no longer referred to as serious case reviews. So you will see from the annual report in front of you that they are now referred to as child safeguarding practice reviews. So they have exactly the same purpose, but what they have now allowed us to do is have a bit more flexibility in terms of the methodology of how we undertake them. Because one of the criticisms of serious case reviews was that they were quite lengthy in how long they took for us to get some of those lessons out, whereas now we can turn things around much more quickly because we have flexibility to do the methodology how we choose to do it. The other thing as well is that there's a focus on the good practice that's coming out of some of the cases, as well as kind of the more poor practice that people may pick up. And I think it's a real accolade actually to partners across the partnership that we were actually recognised in the triennial review of case reviews as actually really embedding and having an impact from the learning that we pick up out of case reviews. And very much there's no point doing things if it doesn't make a difference. And it was a really good thing for me that we were recognised by government as actually the case reviews we're doing, they actually could evidence that they had an impact on practice. So that was a real strength for us for the partnership. In terms of training, we still continue to run the multi-agency training programme. One of the things that I did want to bring to your attention this evening is, and I know it's been a discussion point when I've come previously for people who have attended some of our training, is that obviously as of March, our face-to-face training had to stop because we obviously were in lockdown restrictions and were unable to deliver any face-to-face training. And I know that it does come outside of the time frame of the report you've got in front of you, but I just wanted to give you some assurances really to the committee that we have continued to deliver training. We have very, very quickly moved to delivering what we called online sways, which were basically online virtual training that people could access at any point in time, that had a vocal recording over the top of them. And they were on a variety of subject matters, which we considered to be ones that were relatively straightforward in safeguarding terms, so that people could access those and didn't necessarily need somebody to stand there and actually have those conversations with them. Since we launched those, we've now had over 11,000 people access the sways. So for us, that's unbelievable, really. It's huge. And probably unsurprisingly, we will be continuing doing those regardless of what happens in terms of whatever the new normal looks like. And they've obviously been a bonus really for us in terms of the COVID lockdown. What we were mindful of though is that people do need to have an opportunity to talk through concerns about safeguarding. So we have ensured that professionals are given opportunities to come into what we call drop-in sessions, where people can come and talk to us about anything that they've accessed during those training sessions and discuss them with us if they've got any concerns or any points of clarification. Some of the other training sessions, things like child criminal exploitation, where we know that things move very, very quickly and models move and numbers move and areas move, we decided actually that whilst we could deliver some very basic training around that actually we needed to ensure that was still being delivered virtually face to face. So whilst we don't deliver everything face to face anymore, we have made the decision that there are certain topics that we would still continue to deliver face to face. So we are still doing that, but obviously at a much reduced capacity to what it was. And the other thing from COVID as well is we've been really supporting our partners in terms of getting social media messages out around safeguarding. Particularly the need for actually children's social care are still there, and we still now more than ever need to be reporting incidences of children and adults, because I cover adults as well, who are vulnerable and are in lockdown positions. So we were very and continue to be proactive in terms of getting messages out around safeguarding, mental health, domestic abuse, etc. And our posts, we've got a reach of around 30,000 people that we've built up. So again, we are aware that we are getting those messages out to people, which has been really, really helpful. And we've also been working really hard with our voluntary sector, because at the point of lockdown, obviously lots of people suddenly became community volunteers and were put into a world where they hadn't had any safeguarding experience before. So we've been working really hard with our voluntary sector and communities across the county. We've developed bespoke training for them. We've gone in and done network sessions for them. We've developed leaflets, guidance and things to try and support those people who have been put into those situations, and that again will be ongoing. In terms of the impact of the training, what we do is, as I said earlier, I think it's really important that we don't just deliver something, but it does have an impact. And we do go back to people 3 months after any training that they've attended with us to say, actually, what has changed as a result of you attending our training? And could you give us examples of that, please? And we have tweaked that, obviously, in terms of the online facility that we've got at the moment. And any of that training, then kind of the impact comes back into us. And it has resulted in the past where people haven't been able to do things because of processes or procedures have needed to be tweaked. So we take that impact, kind of the training, very, very seriously. But that was a very, very quick overview. I wasn't sure if there was anything in particular that anybody wanted to focus on, but I'm just very aware that the report you have in front of you is very, very retrospective.
Okay, thanks a lot, Joe. Have we any questions? First one on my list is Al Kingsley.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Joe. It's a really good report. There's all sorts of positives and information in there, and I appreciate it's somewhat out of date now. The question was really about the report highlights lots of the positive things that you've done over that year's period, but it's quite difficult to, within the context of the report, measure impact or draw any comparisons between the level of activities from a previous year. So there's as much about a question about picking your brains, given that you indicated you were heading quickly towards writing the next report, about it. Are there appropriate metrics that could be included in that report to really kind of support the impact that you're seeing on the ground from a report perspective?
Absolutely, and I'm more than happy to take that back and ensure that in next year's report that we actually have a whole section on that, if that would be useful for members to see. What we have, which isn't within here, is a quality and effectiveness group, which is called QUEG, which is our metrics and quality impact group. I chair that group personally, and one of the things that we look at there is the impact of the work that we've done. So very often what we do is we'll bring a new, so if I give you an example, actually, one of the things that came out of one of the audits that we ran was around neglect and neglect tools, and the need to have a single neglect tool that would go across the county. That now is in place and has been launched, and we're now in the process of auditing that now to see what the impact of that is. So very much the method that we adopt is we have we tend to have a working group that looks at a particular area. We look at what we need to put in place, and generally we won't go just for a training option. We'll tend to do training and resource packs. We do try as hard as possible to ensure that we have engagement, not just from the senior managers who sit on the boards that we attend, but also our frontline practitioners as well. We have frontline practitioner forums, and we also speak regularly to young people around their experiences, and all of that information gets fed back into our quality of an effectiveness group, which is our audit and quality, to look at what difference it's made, and if it hasn't made a difference, why hasn't it made a difference, and what do we need to tweak. And our kind of end of that process really is we hold termly workshops which are on the impact of the work that we've done, that we feed back out into the workforce. So we tend to tie those in with anything that we've got that's come out of surveys that we run, or any of the case reviews that we've done, or any of the audit activity. So I tend to try and see it almost as a cycle, really, that never really finishes, but there's quite clear stages that we go through. But absolutely, if it would be useful for people, we can put more in next year about this is the impact of what we've done and where things have worked or not worked.
Good. Thank you. Councillor Robinson, please.
Thank you. Thank you for this report. And I think I found it really fascinating to read. And I think from reading this and those highlight reports you provided since the start of the pandemic, I think I've got a real sense of it's a service that's continually striving further. And lots of bits I read, I thought, you know, that sounds really impressive practice. So I just wanted to say thank you to you and your team for striving so far in this. I just want to ask a question about page 47. I noted with interest there was something about in a case review it had come up highlighting the involvement of housing providers in safeguarding, and it noted the good news that the district council, so I'm taking that to Cambridgeshire, had got on board with this, but not housing associations in their people who are front-facing housing officers routinely receiving safeguarding training. So is this something that you've kind of pursued with PCC housing officers, and any luck with any housing associations? Because I can see the value in them being trained.
Yeah, absolutely, and you would be right in thinking it was a Cambridgeshire case. Yes, and one of the things I think in the past, if I'm honest, as a partnership, that I don't think we necessarily recognised was the importance of housing around the table for some of these things, because a lot of the families that come across our doors are often involved in housing. So certainly since this was reported, we've worked really closely with housing to write some specific guidance for housing officers around what to be looking for, what to be doing, and we did that in conjunction with a housing group. We've developed some specific training for housing officers as well around safeguarding and again what to do, and some resources and tools. I've been and presented at the housing board around kind of messages from housing, and I have to say Claire Higgins from Cross Keys Housing sits on the safeguarding board as a link straight into housing as well, and has been instrumental at getting some of the messages out for us. In fact, we've recently just done an audit actually out to the housing association, so can we just check who's had what training, so we're kind of keeping a bit of an eye, I suppose. But also we've included housing now on a lot of, well actually on all of our other subcommittee groups that sit below the safeguarding board, whereas they weren't previously. So I wouldn't say that we're there, Councillor Robinson. I still think there's a way to go, and hopefully this time next year I might be able to give you a different story.
I was just thinking that sounds like incredibly impressive progress from the point you'd put in the report. That sounds like a lot's been done. So thank you.
Yeah, we've really tried, and in fairness, we were pushing at quite an open door actually. People were quite happy to work with us, and as I say, I work across adults and children's, and my services across adults and children's, so we've replicated that for the adults as well as for the children's.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Coles, please.
Thank you, Chair, and Joe, thanks very much for the report. I wonder if you could comment particularly on child criminal exploitation. I was delighted to hear that it's your area of expertise. So if I sort of give a for instance to you, often it's a regular complaint to hear about gangs of youths tagging everywhere, getting involved in low-level street crime. I'm also aware of the more serious end with county lines, and certainly in 2017 there was the connection with London and Luton gangs coming, and of course that's developed very quickly and changed. I note that a lot of the local counties are working together now. That was very interesting to see how they've developed their programmes. But I'm wondering if you can, maybe it's something to give to all councillors as some sort of briefing at some stage about the impact of this in terms of what we see of all the allegations of youth crime that's coming from the community. Because obviously there's a very great difference between low-level activity, local gang activity, and then much more serious activity in child exploitation and in county lines. So I'd be interested to know on whether you think that's useful, and also a bit of an update about how things have developed there over the last year.
Yeah, absolutely. Dealing, I think, with the briefing in the first instance, absolutely. I think things have moved on quite significantly, and I'm aware that we brief obviously at the safeguarding boards, but yourselves might not be aware. So I'm more than happy to take that forward. I would just like to say I probably wouldn't describe myself as an expert. I have an expert within my service, so I would just caveat that before I say anything else, Councillor Coles. But we have, I think we've, we saw quite a change in terms of county lines during COVID, and obviously that it had a significant impact on us, but it also had a significant impact on the county lines models, both locally and obviously nationally as well. One of the things that has been a real bonus for us is that we've developed a multi-agency mapping process, which allows us to go down to quite granular detail and come up with a multi-agency response, which includes local policing, education, health, social care, voluntary sector, etc., into very localized areas, which is something we weren't doing previously. So previously we were very much looking kind of at quite a large area, as opposed to I don't know, stand ground in Peterborough, which happens to be where I am. It's not a particularly gang orientated area, but we may have a very different issue to Warrington or Paston or another area. So what we did was we developed a mapping area which is actually led or started by our schools. So where our schools start to say to us, we've got particular issues with children or particular cohorts of children, or children who've gone missing from education, or children who've been excluded, and then we tie that in with the community information. That's what kind of leads our mapping, and we've almost gone down to school level mapping areas to be able to do responses. And that includes, as I say, that the local policing have been instrumental in dealing with this and participating with this. And what it's allowed us to do is to put in quite localized approaches. It looks at individual young people who may be at risk. It looks at the adults, but it also looks at the community response as well, and what's going to be put into the community, and also any health needs that those young people may have. So it is truly multi-agency in terms of an approach. I have to say, we started it in Peterborough, and Peterborough, it's far more embedded in Peterborough than it is in Cambridgeshire at the moment. They're just starting to look at it in Cambridgeshire and just started to run some. But we've actually been asked by the Home Office, we're doing some work with the Home Office at the moment, because they want to try and take some of the models that we've got to try and implement them. Because the other area that we've been working with, again, which we didn't realise was not necessarily, just thought everybody did it, but we've also been working with some of our urban planning colleagues as well, when new areas have been set up, to actually be saying you might not want to put a park area there, or you might want to think about putting an alley between those. So I would say things have really moved on actually in the last couple of years, and I think people are less silo working and much more joined up together. Again, I wouldn't say that it's completely solved and it's cracked, but from where we were to where we are now, I think we're in a much better position. And the other thing is, I think people are recognizing it much more now. So I know we've seen an increase in some of the numbers, but I wouldn't necessarily see that as a bad thing. Actually, I think those young people are now being recognized, whereas previously they weren't necessarily. And I do think we need to be a bit careful sometimes with how some of those statistics are interpreted.
Yes, thank you. And if in your designing out crime mode you can come up with a wall that can't work with graffiti, I'd be delighted.
Lovely. Peter Countley, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Joe, for the annual report. May I ask, to what extent is FGM a growing cause for concern across Peterborough, and how is this particular issue being tackled in a preventative and proactive way, and also in a reactive and responsive way, which addresses the full extent of the harm caused and the criminality of the perpetrators?
Okay, so we're in quite a lucky position in Peterborough, because our designated doctor, who some of you may know, who's Dr. Amelia Vacevic, actually sits on the national FGM doctors group. So he's absolutely very well versed in terms of FGM and guidance. And I'm also a rep on the national FGM panel as well. So we're quite lucky because we get access to quite a lot of the latest guidance as it's coming out. So we have absolutely, we have a population that would support suggestions that there would be FGM. We have, the numbers are not particularly high, to be honest. I can't give you the exact figures at the moment, but they don't, when we look at them nationally, they don't prompt as being significantly high. We run FGM training, which Amelia runs on our behalf, Dr. Amelia runs on our behalf, and staff attend that. We also have an FGM protocol that's in place, which has very, very clear flow charts in terms of what to do when you suspect or think that there may be FGM, or you're aware that a parent has been cut, for example, and the implications that that may have. And there's leaflets that we have I think we've got it into 102 different languages now that are available for people, that we can give out, for staff can give out to people. In terms of FGM itself, the other thing that we put on, and part of the reason we put it on actually was because of FGM, was around having difficult conversations training for people, because sometimes people can find it quite difficult to talk about certain things with people, particularly if we're looking at maybe some agencies who don't necessarily do this as bread and butter. So to support our practitioners in not just being able to recognise it, etc., we actually we do run having difficult conversations, and that obviously doesn't just span FGM, that covers an awful lot of safeguarding kind of areas. So we run training, we have guidance, we have clear flow charts, we check our FGM numbers through QEG twice yearly, and obviously they have to get reported into government. And we do audits around FGM and how those are being processed. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Thank you very much. I feel you've answered the question very fully. So thank you for giving such a detailed answer.
No problem.
Thank you. Claire Watchhorn, please.
Thank you, Chair. Hello, Joe.
Hi.
This question kind of links back to one of the previous questions about agencies and the structure of your partnership board. On page 40, there's a diagram, and there's a dotted line to education safeguarding and child protection, and also the health safeguarding.
Yeah.
I just wonder, could you explain what that means in terms of their participation to your partnership board?
Yeah, absolutely. So within the partnership structure and the diagram that you can see on page 40, the different ones in bold colours are groups which we run, that I'm responsible for within, or within our structure. So they are safeguarding board meetings. The education and child protection group and the health safeguarding group are what are led through education. That's an education group, and health is a health group. So the health group is one that brings together kind of all of our health trusts together to talk about safeguarding. So they kind of feed into us. We use them in terms of escalation, or they can escalate to us, or we can use them as conduits for information going out. So they linked into us, but they are not a safeguarding board meeting. They are meetings in their own right. But what I would certainly say is that health and education are extremely engaged all the way through, again, through our structures. But that's the reason why they're dotted lines, because I can't put them as a safeguarding board meeting, because they're not owned by the safeguarding board. They're owned by education or owned by health.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And Councillor Day, please, and this will be our last question on this item.
Hello, thank you. And yeah, I just wanted to echo Councillor Robertson's sentiments. It was a really detailed report, and some of it was quite hard to read, but it's just fantastic, the amount of work, and as Councillor Robertson said, how far you're striving. Really liked what you said about urban planning as well, and how important that is, because we all know the wards, as ward councillors, the areas where urban planning can make a real difference to the sort of work that you do. So my question was about rapid reviews. On page 45, you talk about following the issue of working together 2018, the Safeguarding Partnership Board developed a process including a new rapid review referral form, and then you talk about how that guidance and form had to be adapted to a new cluster process, although there was some added pressure onto the partners and you had to review it and adapt it again. You go on to talk about some other adaptations as well in different methodologies in completing the CSPRSs. I just wondered how that's going now. Obviously this report is a bit retrospective. Has that worked in terms of what you wanted it to do, and how is that developing? Thank you.
So I think it would be unfair if I didn't say that trying to turn some of these around in 10 working days has not had its challenges. If I'm honest, it's quite difficult for, so they come into us. We obviously go out to agencies, do an information trawl. This is the rapid review. So sorry, I'll go back slightly actually. So the process now is that if somebody thinks there's a case that meets the criteria for what is now a child safeguarding practice review, or was previously a serious case review, they notify us. There's a referral that comes in. We have to collate that information. Then we go out to all agencies who we think are involved in the case, and they have 10 days to come back to us with all of the information collated, analysis, etc. together, for us to then have a rapid review panel meeting where all of those agencies come together and discuss whether or not we think it meets the criteria for a case review. We then have to decide if we think it's a local review or a national review. I then have to pull together a return that goes into the national panel, and the national panel have the eventual sign off on whether or not we do a case review. So it's quite difficult for agencies to meet that. And I have to say, I think that at the early days, at the very outset, some of the quality of the information that we were getting back was not great. Some of it was cut and paste chronologies, etc., because people were trying to do it in a very, very tight time scale. We've really evolved that, and to be honest, even since this document, I've changed the forms again, because really what we realised quite quickly was if we did this right and we put the time and effort in at the beginning, a lot of the basis for what our learning was going to be was already, the bones of it were already there. So we've very much kind of moved now to a, yes, tell us the outline of how you've been involved, but actually what do you think the learning is from this case? Where do you think the benefit would be in undertaking a review? And there's a much more analytical approach now from agencies bringing in information rather than just supplying a chronological information, where it was when this first came out. So I would say we're not alone in feeling that. Both regional and nationally, people have struggled with that process. And I think all of us have borrowed from pride with other areas that maybe have said, oh, this worked, so let's try it. So I think we're now there with the rapid review process itself. I think that's much better, and the quality of the information that we get is much better. What has been absolutely fantastic, certainly from my perspective, is having the ability and the freedom to undertake the case reviews how you want to. So some of the cases that we get in are extremely complex, and you would want an awful lot of time to really go through that information and to have IMRs and chronologies and all of those other things. Some of the cases are actually, they could be very young children who the cases are actually relatively, they're extremely sad, but quite straightforward cases where there hasn't been much involvement with agencies. Whereas actually what we really need to do is get into a room together, look at our records and come together very quickly. And we've now got the ability to do that. And the thing for me, as I've said all the way through this, it's the impact for me in getting the learning out to the practitioners and getting it out to people to make a difference. And that's where we can now have the speed to do that. So I was a little bit reluctant when it first came in. I wasn't a great fan of it, but I have to say now I think we've got a much better process, and we've got it to work in our favour really in terms of having that flexibility. So yeah, it's been a learning process though.
Thank you. That was an excellent response, and thank you for your work.
Thank you.
Thank you. As there are no further questions, I would like to note the content and recommendations in the report, which is before you. Is the committee satisfied that we have done this? Please indicate by raising your virtual hand if you object. I can't see any objectors, so the recommendation is agreed. So thank you very much, Joe, in particular.
Thank you.
Full report, and I won't wish you a safe journey home, but thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. Take care.
Okay. Right, we move on to agenda item 7, the annual report of Peterborough Virtual School for Children in Care 2018 to 2019, including a report on the impact of COVID-19, pages 59 to 90 of the agenda. I would like to welcome Dee Glover, Head Teacher of Peterborough Virtual School for Children in Care. My pictures have gone. I don't know if you can hear me. If I don't know. Oh yes, I'm still on. Yeah, there was a flicker then. I thought, oh no, power cut or something. But no, not this time. So thank you, Dee, all yours.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Good evening, everybody, and thank you for inviting me to present my report this evening. I'll mirror what Joe has said in that the report now seems very old, and like Joe, I refreshed myself with it earlier on today, and it just seems a lifetime ago for various reasons. But hopefully it gave you all the information you needed. Just to pick out some highlights, really, it's always really difficult to prioritize what I want to say to people, because really what I want to say to you at the start of this is how great our children in care are. And I'll talk more about that when I talk about their response to COVID. We have to talk about attainment. It's very important. We want all our children to achieve the very best that they can, achieve their potential, and that obviously is the driving force behind what we do. So if we look at the attainment, the size of our cohorts fluctuates so much year on year, which impacts on the data. So whilst there are comparisons from year on year, I'm slightly anxious about sharing that because I don't think it truly reflects what our children are achieving. The impact of the number of children we have with education healthcare plans is clear, and also with children who have special educational needs. Now, I'm very clear that it doesn't mean to say they can't achieve. It's just that their starting point is sometimes lower than their peers. So it does have an impact, and we have to acknowledge that. The children who have interesting SDQ scores, I'll just explain. That's a strengths and difficulties questionnaire, which is completed by carers of the children, sometimes the children themselves if they're older, and sometimes schools, indicates their emotional and mental health. And it's really important to acknowledge that sometimes our children can't learn. It's not a question of won't learn, it's just that they're not in a situation where they can learn. So we really have to acknowledge that as well, and work with our partners, schools, carers, social workers, to make sure that we support a child through that difficult time. Just to summarise then, the Key Stage 1 trend was similar to national. Again, we have very small numbers. One child can have a huge impact on the data. And the Key Stage 2 result we were really pleased about. The reading, writing and maths combined score was above the national figure for children in care. And that's a credit to my team, who work really closely with designated teachers in school to ensure that they are doing the right thing for the child. So we challenge, why aren't they achieving? Why aren't you doing interventions with them? What are you doing to help this child improve their levels? So it really is a partnership between us and the schools. Key Stage 4 overall grades improved from the previous year and are above or close to national, with a strong pass band of 9 to 5 GCSE grade, 3% higher than national. Now, I have to say, our 2019 cohort was great. All our cohorts are great, whatever year it is, but these particularly so. We had some very bright young people who had been in care for a significant period of time, which meant that our interventions had begun early. So they worked really hard, the schools worked really hard with them, foster carers supported them, and it was great to see that. Obviously, we haven't not going to have results for 2020. I will talk a little bit later about what our predictive grades might be. But it's such a different cohort this year, and it's a different cohort next year. So we have to take it year on year and be very grateful and pleased about how our children achieve, considering some of the difficulties they faced. We had really positive attendance data. Fixed term exclusions were slightly above national. Now, in terms of fixed term exclusions, we are informed by our data collection service for attendance. Immediately a fixed term exclusion takes place, and we phone the school immediately, find out what's been going on, and then support the return to school interview if a child has had a fixed term exclusion. Schools have behaviour policies. Children have to follow those, but our job is to intervene and explain maybe why that something has happened. Say, well, actually they came into care last night, or, you know, they had contact last night with a carer, with a parent rather, which has upset them. So we're very much an intermediary, and very aware of a lot of the situations that cause our children to have a fixed term exclusion. No permanent exclusions. Sometimes you get very close to a permanent exclusion, but again, our role is to make sure that that doesn't happen. It may be that we arrange a managed move to another setting, which will better meet the needs of the child, but it's not good for anybody, any young person, to have a permanent exclusion on their record. There are times when it has to happen. We have had this year a young person who took drugs onto a school site to sell. He was very open about it. And it was a challenge to work with the school on that one, but we did agree a managed move, and that child, a young person, was successfully moved to another setting. The personal education plan is really our means of monitoring the child. It involves the child. There should be 3 of these meetings a year with the designated teacher, the social worker, the foster carer, and the child, if it's appropriate for them to attend, planning that child's education. And one of the criticisms in the past from Ofsted was that there wasn't a sense of the child's voice coming through the PEP. Now, sometimes the child's voice is saying nothing, and I absolutely accept that. If they don't want to speak, we should accept that as their voice. But we have been making this a priority this year, requesting that designated teachers speak to the young people or a person with whom the child has a good relationship. And if they have an aspiration, we will support the school and discuss how we can support that. I mean, it has been a bit of a challenge when we had a young person who wanted to be a fairy. So if anybody's got any ideas on how that can be achieved, please let me know. But if a child is expressing an interest in being in the police force or joining the fire service, we'll make sure that they can have a visit, obviously in earlier times, and hopefully we can resume those things post-COVID. So we make sure that that aspiration is taken seriously and the child is supported in that aspiration. And we have really, really good PEP completion. It's hard work. We work really hard at it. It's a priority. But every month, all the data is, I know that we have 100% PEP completion, and we're working really hard on compliance. We have an annual quality assurance from the local authority, and we're going to instigate a joint process with Cambridgeshire Virtual School of auditing each other's PEPs. So we'll have another line of quality assurance other than my team and the local authority. We'll bring somebody else in to make sure that we are happy with the quality of the PEP. Pupil Premium, you know, it's there to be spent to support children. There was a breakdown in the report of how it's been spent. Sometimes the largest expenditure is maintaining a child in school, particularly some younger children when they come into care, pretty traumatized. Education isn't a priority. Education hasn't been a priority within their family. And it's really important that to support a foster placement, we support that child to stay in care. So quite a high proportion of our Pupil Premium is spent on maintaining children in care using the Pupil Premium. That is usually teaching assistant time. We require weekly reports so that we can judge impact of that intervention. And if we're not happy with the intervention, again, we'll challenge the school and ask them to relook at the target, see how we can improve it, and maybe take a different angle of attack. We do retain some Pupil Premium. Again, that's outlined in the report. I'm looking up there because that's where I've got my report. Some of the expenditure, our forest school expenditure, has been a real benefit for some of our young children. It's been really disappointing that we haven't been able to maintain that during the COVID situation. But again, we've got children lined up to start that next week so that it will support them back into their mainstream environment. In terms of post-16, tricky. Interestingly enough, I was looking at our data for the moment. Our NEAT figures at the moment mirror those of May 2019. And it is a standard process, really. They reach a certain time in their course where they either disengage, they just stop attending. So the provider will take steps against it. But we work really hard. My post-16 coordinator works really hard with the young people, the care providers and the education settings to make sure that we try and re-engage that young person. But we have to put our hands up and say sometimes there's just nothing we can do. Doesn't mean to say we don't try, but we just have to acknowledge that sometimes a child or young person's mind is elsewhere, and we can't engage them in anything. So that's just summarising the report of 2018 to 2019. My 2020 report, 2019 to 20 report, will be ready very soon, because we're not waiting for any validation of data, attainment data, because obviously children and young people were not formally assessed in 2020. So my summary report will be available by the end of March. Just want to talk a little bit about what our priorities were for 2019 to 20. In terms of post-16 reducing NEETs, well, actually currently, as of today, we have 13 NEETs out of a cohort of 85. Again, COVID has had a massive impact on engagement for our post-16 young people, not being able to go into college, having difficulty with accessing online learning, particularly our unaccompanied asylum-seeking young people, for whom language is a barrier anyway, but particularly if they're having to use a device rather than go in and have face-to-face teaching. In terms of PEPs, we're proving that our child's voice has improved. We are listening more children are taking part in it. We've done some training on how to ask the questions. You don't have to ask a direct question of a child. We've done some training on that you might just be able to drop it into a conversation. Many ways to skin a cat. Sorry, pet lovers, ignore that one. But there are lots of different ways to get information from young people, and that has been an improvement this year. The Attachment Aware project, a couple of years ago, I launched the announcement that I wanted Peterborough to be an attachment aware city, which means that there's an acknowledgement of the difficulties young people and children have in forming relationships with adults. We're getting there. We've had 15 schools already on the attachment programme. We've got another 12 lined up to join us for the next year. So we are getting there. And the impact on that is sort of tangible. For example, a school today, we had a catch-up meeting with our current schools, spoke about the fact that they now greet every child by their first name. And that's just had a huge impact. The children just smile. It's just acknowledging that we know who you are, you're welcome here. And it's just made a huge difference. Another primary school has had a big impact in playground behaviour, where people, rather than just standing watching what's going on in the playground, might join in and kick the football. So it really does have a positive impact, and I'm really proud of the progress that programme is making. We've appointed a new advisor for children previously in care, who's updating all sorts of information and fielding inquiries from schools, parents who've adopted children or have children on SGO. It's an increasing piece of our work, and I'm very happy to report that our new advisor is really on it. It's working closely with Norfolk and Cambridgeshire. So I think that's going to be a real strength of our work this year and in the coming years. So I just want to talk a little bit about the COVID response. You've seen, again, my report on that. It's been a tricky year for everybody. Schools, children, carers, social workers, everybody's worked really hard to make sure that our children are happy. And that was my key thing. So when a carer rang me and said, I can't get them to do their maths, what was important for me was making sure a relationship was preserved. If the child really didn't want to do maths, don't have a row about it. We sent out lots of activities that could be done outside, outdoors, go and plant a sunflower seed or things like that. So just engage with your child or young person. Don't give them a hard time if they don't want to do their maths. And I think that was a good approach. I'm happy with that approach. We're mindful that children will need some time to make progress again. I'm not going to use the phrase catch up. They're just going to be where they are and be supported by us and school to make the progress. We've allocated £600 per child as part of our Pupil Premium allocation, calling it a COVID recovery fund. That's available because in the summer term, when children weren't in school, schools were not
asking us for any pupil premium. So the difference between what we would have given out in the summer term and what we would have given out in the first half of this term sort of matches what we've been able to provide to schools. So we'll be very closely monitoring what schools are going to be doing with that fund. What I want to say is the resilience of our children has just been amazing. You know, they just get on with it, really. And I'm slightly concerned, and this might be a little bit controversial, you know, this lost generation. I'm sorry, I disagree with that. They're a generation. I don't want them to grow up with the label of we're the lost generation of COVID. You know, they can recover. They are resilient, and things will be fine for them at school. So I do have a bit of a problem with that. You know, they'll be fine. And if they're not, we'll make sure that we pick them up, dust them down, and get them back on track. We've provided during COVID a consultation line with my educational psychologists. So if carers, designated teachers, young people felt that they needed to speak to somebody about how they were feeling, we provided that service. Not a great response, which is great. You know, it's sort of, well, if you get too many people calling, there's a lot of things going wrong. But those parents who did contact the service were given the right answers, given ideas, strategies to manage the child who was perhaps really struggling. So when I'm talking about, I don't recognise them as a lost generation, please don't think I'm denying the fact that it will have been very difficult for some of our children. It's just that I don't think we need to attach a label to them. Our priority for the summer term, obviously, we're so pleased that schools are opening on Monday, but it doesn't come without difficulties. Children are still going to be in bubbles. In the primary sector, in the secondary sector, they're going to have to be tested, there are going to be masks worn, so it's still going to be a challenge. And I'm sure John will talk a little bit later about that. But we will be there, you know, we're going to make sure we know by the end of term where our children are in terms of attainment, and will support progress going forward. Just in terms of virtual, we're a virtual school, and my virtual world became even more virtual. Obviously during COVID, but I think what we learned from it was actually, I didn't have to go down to Cornwall to do a PEP meeting for one of our children down there. Nice as it was, you know, it took time. I'd be there for 2 days. You know, we do much more things virtually now. And actually, because of that, we've had greater compliance in terms of children joining meetings. It's been quite a novelty for them to take part in a Zoom meeting. Or you know, Skype or whatever method's being used. So that's been an improvement. And our training has, like Joe, a lot of our training is now available online. It can be viewed at any time. We've done webinars about how to complete PEPs. We're doing a range of training which will be available all the time. So the virtual world has expanded for me far greater than it was before, but it's certainly been an eye-opener and an acknowledgement that actually things can be done differently and are just as beneficial as sitting in a room with people.
Okay, can I just cut you short now, Dee?
Sorry.
Say thanks a lot. We're beginning to run out of time.
Sorry about that.
Okay, so I'm going to open it up to questions. At the moment, it's Councillor Casey.
Thank you very much, Dee, for your presentation and your report. I've thoroughly enjoyed reading it, and I've thoroughly enjoyed the presentation. And actually, some of the things you've said have already answered the questions I was going to ask about how you were working during the virtual, you know, working virtually, and how you've been able to take lessons that you've already had and extended them in order to sort of carry on after the whole thing's through. And I love your approach to not labeling the children as well. I've heard them called as the lost generation, but also pandennials as well. And I think that was a particularly strange one that I thought I'd made up myself, but then found it was being used by the World Economic Forum as well. But no, I just thought I'd really say thank you very much for your report. Fantastic to see what you're doing and how the children are being supported.
Thank you, Councillor.
Yeah, thank you. And on to Peter Countley now, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Dee, for your report and presentation, and many congratulations on the success of the Key Stage 4 students. That was really good to hear about. The pupil progress scores for Key Stage 2 pupils in the report were a long way behind national averages for 2019, particularly in reading and maths. And so may I ask what's been done strategically to address that particular issue, and also, as you mentioned, high numbers of pupils who are not in education, employment or training in years 12 and 13 by the summer term is concerning. So can you say what you feel can be done to prevent growing levels of disengagement amongst the sixth formers? And in relation to both those issues, may I ask what level of training has been provided for designated teachers and the school governors to whom they report, to help them devise high quality personal education plans and evaluate their impact with the young people to whom they relate?
Yeah, thank you. I'll take the progress question first. So I've built up the team. We have a primary literacy teacher and a primary HLTA, and I also have a primary maths teacher who also manages our our forest school. So in terms of progress, we have a monthly analysis of where our children are, and interventions are planned with the primary literacy teacher and the HLTA if we need to be directly involved with a child. If we're not directly involved with the child because we don't have capacity, my team will challenge the school, say, right, what are we going to do about this? This is how it is. What can we do? So we are very mindful of progress, but also in the early stages of education, some of these children have come into care. They've been in care at least for a year, but what's gone on in the early years has a huge impact on their progress. So we're starting off from a fairly low baseline. It's not an excuse, it's just how it is. And then we build on that by making sure the interventions are in place. And my primary literacy teacher has just devised a training scheme for schools to train teaching assistants to support phonics work. So that's an ongoing process, really. So we're trying to empower people, not just our team and designated teachers, to ensure that the children get the support they need. But I acknowledge, yes, the progress was disappointing, but we need to build on that now. We need to see where the children are when they come in, see how they're progressing, and make sure that we accelerate that progress as the years of them being in care go on. In terms of, so I'll relate that to training. So our designated teachers have training available to them now online. But my team meet every term with each designated teacher in every school. So every member of staff has a school designated to them, and meet with them and train them in how to complete PEPs. I'm pretty happy that they get a good service from us. Our concern has always been our out of city designated teachers, because we have a fair number of children placed out of the city boundary, and it has sometimes been difficult to get to them. But that's where the virtual world has been advantageous, because they can now view our training webinars and other stuff online. And there's also a governor training pack being put together in liaison with a Cambridge virtual school. So again, that will be available all the time. I, up until now, have delivered training face-to-face, but obviously now it's going to be greatly improved by going online, because people can view it at their leisure and not be confined to coming to Peterborough Football Stadium in an evening when it's cold and wet and listen to me droning on for a couple of hours. So it is not droning on. So it is a much better way of training and reaching a higher number of people. In terms of disengagement, Saf, my post-16 coordinator, works really hard. There's a big drive from the Eastern region post-16 coordinators, because I'm not sharing just a Peterborough pattern. This is a pattern in the Eastern region and nationally. So I meet with other Eastern region heads every term, and we're all telling the same tale, really. It's not good enough. We work really hard to try and engage these young people. SAF is constantly looking for different avenues to engage these young people. It is a learning curve, and it changes year on year, but I can just only reassure you that we do our very best to re-engage young people. It's been particularly difficult this last year, and that is going to take a little time to get back on track, just because of the difficulty with engagement and online learning. But certainly with the colleges opening on Monday, we're hoping to see an improvement in engagement and offering young people new courses.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Okay,
Next question, Councillor Robinson, please.
Thank you. So I noted with interest the part about attachment aware and trauma informed champion schools, and like you, I think that's training that I'd love to see every teacher have. But with that kind of in mind, I was then looking at the chart on 12.3 about the interventions that the children are assigned to. And I guess with your kind of numeracy lead and your English lead, I could see, you know, yeah, there's lots of children signed up to those kind of like tutoring, one-to-one, academic interventions. But when you tot up the number of children who are doing the ones on self-esteem, social, emotional, emotion coaching, it's much less. And when I'm kind of thinking about those are sometimes the barriers to learning, what your thoughts are on why there is sort of so many less of those interventions, and is it perhaps because as schools we find it very easy to find a phonics intervention to put a kid on, but we maybe don't all have ELSA trained TAs or programs like Talk About and things available to us? Do you think that's maybe why there's not so many children put on those interventions?
I think that's one aspect of it. I suppose looking at the chart in terms of a learning mentor, one-to-one mentoring might include some sort of trauma-aware work with a young person. So whilst the number specifically talking about improving self-esteem looks low, I think there are activities like that take place within most of the interventions. But the idea of the attachment aware and trauma-informed schools is that everybody in the school will know how to manage a child and deal with a child. So the lunchtime supervisor, the caretaker, or the site manager, the first person to greet the child at the door. I mean, there was a massive impact at Queen Catherine Academy when they first joined with the programme, because sometimes the first thing they said to a child is, wear your school shoes, you know, why have you got trainers on? And it's a really aggressive start to the day. And that's not on. You can deal with that later. So
yeah, I think I was just thinking about, and those kinds of things are very important, but I was thinking interventions that upskill young people, that give them more tools in their toolkit, like those programs that teach compromise and how conflict resolution and those kind of skills. Do we feel that we're kind of upskilling children enough in those things that help promote their well-being?
I think it's something we need to work on. It's not something we do specifically. I guess we are looking for that to happen through other areas. I mean, certainly within the Forest School, there's been a big impact on how we've worked with primary school children. And I'm really keen to get on board a secondary forest school, you know, because that is a really good way of engaging children. But you're right, something we need to look into. The social and emotional learning intervention, I need to go back and look to see what the impact of that is. But you're right, it's about empowering the young people themselves to be more resilient. So it is an area for consideration. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next question, Flavio, please.
Thank you, Chair. Dee, just regarding the NEETs and the post-16 provision, and obviously good news that the colleges are back next week. How do you work with new providers or identify new providers for good, high quality learning options for our NEET young people?
Yeah, okay, thank you. Yes, I think there has been a tendency for people to set themselves up as a provider, and we make sure that every provider is quality assured. By staff will go in and visit them. You know, we look for reviews, make sure that they're providing a good service. As you say, we will go visit the site. It's not always as good as we'd like it to be, so we wouldn't recommend that for a child, but a young person. It is all down to really what SAF, my post-16 coordinator, does. And I've just employed somebody else to support him. It's a big cohort to work with. This person we're just taking on has done a lot of transition work with year 11s and post-16, and part of her work will be specifically to identify new places of learning, quality assure those places of learning, and support children into them if it's appropriate for them.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Haynes now, please.
Thank you, Chair. It was just a quick question in a sense. It was about section 12.2, administration of the grant. When I was looking through that table, the number that jumped out at me was about the Letterbox Club, just over £13,000. And from the description about a book being sent monthly with supporting activities to identify children, it just seemed like a lot of money. So I wondered if you could just clarify exactly what that entails.
Okay. It is really successful, and I probably should have been specific about the number of children who receive the books. So they receive a book every month. They're really high quality books. My primary literacy teacher who administers it keeps saying, well, I can buy the books and I can send them out. I said, but you just don't have time. So we are using, an intermediary to do the job for us. So we've probably got about 90 children, primary children, receiving those books. And we get really positive feedback from it. And actually, we're just about to do another survey of the children to see how they've enjoyed it and what the impact has been. So it does seem a lot of money, but actually it's really beneficial. And next time I will include the number of children who are participating in the programme.
Good. Thank you. And the last question on this item, Councillor Day, please.
Hi, thank you. I just wanted to say thanks for the report. I just want to ask a bit more about the forest school. I think it's an incredible idea that you've got a forest school, and I really understand why that works. I certainly advocate more outdoors and hands-on learning. I think children should be out in the natural world and the environment and developing hands-on skills. And I would urge all schools to explore this kind of idea. I just wondered, I used to work in education and museums and heritage sites, putting on educational programmes for schools. And I just wondered if you thought about, and you probably already do this, about working with museums and heritage sites, maybe on, a set block of, 6 weeks going to, I don't know, maybe I should swing to the museum first, but I just wondered if you thought about developing your links in that way as well.
Yeah, it's certainly something we'll be looking at. We haven't done it yet. Good idea. And it's something we'll look into. I think the Forest School is our first venture into sort of exploring other avenues. It's in partnership with Ravensthorpe. The biggest problem we have is that it isn't actually a forest, but we're getting around that. So we're sort of calling it an outdoor learning centre. But yeah, certainly we'll look at every avenue there is to sort of engage children in other things. If they're interested in the Vikings or whatever, we'll make sure we find the appropriate programmes for them to develop that interest and support any aspiration they have in that area. But no, we'll certainly, I'll make a note of that and put my forest school leader onto it. Thank you.
Cool, thank you, cheers.
Okay, thank you. And thanks a lot, Dee. But we go on now, as there are no further questions. I'd like to note the recommendation in the report, which is for the committee to note the content of the Peterborough Virtual School Annual Report for 2018-19 at Appendix 1, and 2, note the COVID-19 update report at Appendix 2. 3, raise any queries they have with the lead officer. Councillor Haynes.
Sorry, could I just ask, Dee said she was doing a survey about the letterbox club. I was just wondering if we could hear maybe about the feedback on how successful it had been and the positive feedback from the children, as well as what Dee said she was already going to include, please. Thank you, Chair. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Right, are the committee satisfied that we have done this? Please indicate by raising your virtual hand if you object. I can't see any objectors, so the recommendation is agreed. Thanks a lot, Dee, for all your hard work tonight and for presenting the report.
Okay, thank you. Good night, everybody.
Good night. Right, we'll now move on to agenda item 8, Service Director Education Update Report, pages 91 to 110 of the agenda. I would like to welcome Jonathan Lewis, Service Director Education, to present the report.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, everyone. I'm not going to talk about the report at all. I think it's probably better I give you an update on what's happened since then. And then maybe you can go back and ask me questions around what I've written and the context, because a fair amount of it is historical. So obviously you've seen the media, you know the situation. We are planning to reopen all our schools in Peterborough on Monday. We will see all our primary pupils go back. Our secondary pupils, age pupils, will go back over a period of the week commencing the 8th. Everything is in place. Everything has been done. We've risk assessed. We've got testing up and running. We've shared guidance. We've communicated with parents and teachers. I think what we're stepping into now is very much a repeat of September. and I'm incredibly confident it's going to go very well. So, you know, we've briefed head teachers on absolutely everything. So I'm very positive about a start on Monday. Obviously, we are still in a period now of close monitoring. We will continue to have protective measures in place, and we will certainly monitor the next 3-week period up until the Easter holidays. But I'm in a really positive place that you know, Peterborough schools will open successfully and move forward. Obviously, the report I've given you goes backwards and look at all the different stages we've been through to get to that point. I've given you information in there on some very historic GCSE information. I've given you some more recent information on phonics. I've updated on school improvement activities and some of the work we're doing around SEN and in our school place planning and education capital team. So, you know, it's a varied and very thorough report. I hope you agree, and there's everything you need to know in there. But otherwise, I'll stop at that point, Chair, and happy to take questions on anything I've covered.
Okay, thanks, Jonathan. At the moment, no questions.
Well, good night, everyone.
Councillor Cole. Oh no, having said that, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 questions. I'm conscious of the time. I think we'll do these 7 questions and then finish roughly at 9 o'clock, as we should be doing, and then we'll start off with Councillor Coles.
Chair, thank you, and Jonathan, thank you very much for your report. Just briefly, you talk on page 93, I think, about Ofsted inspections, sorry, 94. Have you got any intelligence on what those are likely to be like when they come to Peterborough?
So we've got 2 stages of Ofsted inspection at the moment. They are focused on, as I said in the report, around particular schools, looking at the remote learning offer, look at the recovery plans, looking at the progress, because obviously the schools they're targeting have had issues historically. We haven't actually had any of those inspections so far. And as of Friday, they will suspend any further inspections until the week commencing the 15th of March, and they will then run again up until the Easter holidays, in which time we believe full inspections will recommence. So my experience of the inspections in Cambridgeshire has been a positive one. Inspection team looking very closely at the plans, the curriculum offer, how they've engaged remote learning, attendance, and you know, support for vulnerable pupils, and it seems a very fair process and I think very appropriate given the context those schools are in.
Thank you. Just briefly, another part of the report, you mentioned the complaints received by Ofsted from parents and students. I wonder if you have any further information on that.
Yeah, we obviously throughout the process we deal with complaints for a wide range of issues. So, you know, I think you've probably seen it nationally. The Minister for Education suggested that parents contact Ofsted anytime they weren't happy with remote learning. So we've had various correspondence, and obviously our role in certain circumstances is to go and investigate them, be it around what happens in the classroom. It could be
sorry about that.
Fine. It could be a safeguarding issue. It could be any sort of issue around the school. You know, they get resolved promptly. We have an excellent lead in post whose responsibility is to monitor and oversee that. You know, we do build a list of recommendations and thoughts that result from it. And today, I'm not concerned about anything that's come in. It's all been dealt with appropriately.
Thank you very much, Jonathan.
Okay, thank you. Sorry about my phone going off then. I had thought I'd switched it off, but obviously Peterborough Choral Society was far more important, and it had been switched on back on. So anyway, sorry about that. Councillor Brian Rush.
Good evening, John.
Hi, Brian.
Funding for free school meals and Pupil Premium. This year, the figures are going to be based on the October census instead of the January census. This will mean that schools will miss out on a lot of funding because of a lot of children, a lot of parents don't notify schools about what is, you know, the funding they could receive. So schools will be losing out on a lot of money. Could you tell me if anything is being done about this, please?
I think it's fair to say it's been quite a national outcry. So we normally measure Pupil Premium children based on free school meal entitlement in January. Retrospectively, the government changed its view and backdated it. and it has meant a huge gap between the numbers. Obviously, we've been running the winter support grant, and we've seen a lot of families sign up for the incentive of a voucher, which is obviously what they needed, and we will lose a significant amount of money. Our intention is that we're just waiting for the school census to come through from January. Got a few gaps because there was a few system issues with one of the major product providers. We will work out what Peterborough's lost out on, because it will take 15 months now for that funding to come through. And we will be, my intention is to write to the Minister and outline our concerns that these children that need the support the most won't receive it. Obviously, there has been other funding come through. So again, not in my report, but we've got more money for catch-up, which is going to be based upon free school meal children, but not sufficient. Equally, there has been some additional money come through for free school meal children. There was like a top-up from 2 years ago. The government's continued to move forward, but even with that figure, we will still be significantly down. And as children return, and we know there's going to be challenges, we've lost out on that resource, but we will make a noise when we get the data through to justify that.
Can I just come back on that? I did write to the Minister, Nick Gibb, via Charlie Schvara. If you would like to see the letter I got back, I could forward it on to you, because the school I'm at, they're going to lose over £45,500. So if you'd like to see the letter, what I received from him, I'll forward it to you.
Lovely, thanks, Brian. So yeah, Nick is one of the under ministers. We'll try and write to another one, so it's good to know which one you contacted.
Yeah, it's just that's the one Shara got the Charlie got the reply from. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And Councillor Haynes, please.
Thank you, Chair. I suppose I just want to ask, you said about testing is up and running, and I suppose it's just looking for reassurance in a sense, because different schools seem to be organising it slightly differently. So sort of, are you confident that the schools in Peterborough have all got, whatever their process, a rigorous enough testing regime that we are as unlikely as we are to get outbreaks when the students return? And are they organised well enough that the disruption to education is going to be minimal? Because I have to say, as a teacher, I feel like the first week and a half back, I'm going to be very much disturbed in my teaching, because students are going to be going out for their second and third tests. So are you satisfied with the regimes, that they are safe and will have minimal impact on education when the students return?
Yeah, I met with secondary heads last week. Plans are in place. Unfortunately, there is going to be disruption. So if you take a school the size of Thomas Deacon Academy, who I did spend some time one-to-one with talking through how do you do it, it's a huge undertaking for 2,500 pupils to be moved through and worked, to be supported through that. They don't have a spare aircraft hangar on site to actually deliver. So they have to work through the existing systems, bring children in and out of lessons, expecting teachers on the whole to move those children, because we've got to protect the bubbles that are there. It's going to be a really difficult situation. So, I think the view from our schools is the quicker we can do it effectively, the quicker we can move on to home testing, which is the second model that comes after 3 tests, and the less disruption there will be in school as a result of that. But, we've offered out support. There's a couple of schools that have asked us for volunteers so they can create extra lanes, if that's the terminology they use, in the testing. To make sure they get through, and we've done all we can to support those schools to be ready for it. But it's going to be a big job, and it's going to take a little while for the students to understand what a test is like, and they're not nice to do. So it's going to be a disruptive process to go through for a period of time.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Day.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Jonathan, for the report. Yeah, it was really, really detailed, and obviously things have moved on. Just wanted to pick up something on 4.2, I think, where you mentioned that there's no mechanism in place to externally moderate judgments made by GCSE teachers. So I'm quite aware of this as a teacher, and I certainly utilise other departments, and we moderate, not everything, but we moderate when we're unsure of grades. And we might start to look at doing this on a more regular, systematic basis. I just wondered if locally, is there a way that we can moderate grades between schools and between teachers? Because I'm really aware that there can often be discrepancies between schools in terms of grading. And then I just wanted to ask, there was some on Appendix 1, you talk about workforce challenges in terms of delivering dual education in schools, and it's placing a significant pressure on staff with unrealistic expectations set by government. I certainly know it would be very difficult for me to do an online lesson and to do an in-class lesson, given the way that I have to go over to the particular groups of tables, give one-to-one support where needed. Just wondering if there's whether we can do anything as a local authority to reduce those expectations and support local teachers, whether that be, more guided tutorials that are given so that the teacher doesn't have to physically be in front of a laptop to do that and to teach in class. As we know, I'm hoping there won't be any outbreaks, but I'm not expecting that there won't be. I think there will be. So, we're not all vaccinated. None of us in this age group or children are vaccinated. So thank you.
So in terms of your query around moderation, obviously cancellation of GCSE A-levels and the SATs has meant that teacher moderation is going to be used across all those areas. And we're waiting to see what it means for primary schools, because they haven't quite announced how they're going to moderate. But certainly in secondary schools, it's a key part of the feature now. And that came after the report was written. And we will be working together, and there's a suggestion around how that could happen. And I'm sure our subject leads in secondary schools will be working on that methodology, because obviously what we want to do is put in grades that are going to get the right grades and accepted grades, because nor do we want pupils to appeal and go through all that thing. It has to be the right grade that goes through. So certainly facilitation of that will happen. In terms of supporting the dual running of education, so there remains a risk that we will have some students at home if there are COVID cases, some in school, even though full return happens. We facilitated one of the leads of the Oak Academy to come down and talk to the heads and share their offer, how it integrates into teams, how they can deliver education in a slightly different way that supports that. We've even got our teachers, some of my staff have done lessons for the Oak Academy, so we're out there sharing resources and working it through. And it's really tough. We will have to support our teaching staff, which is one of the reasons why we're a bit concerned about the summer school proposals, but it seems to be that they're evolving and we're working through, because our teachers will need a break at the end of this, and we're very keen that we do everything we can to support them until that point.
Okay, thank you. Peter Countley, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Jonathan, for your report. And may I say a huge thank you also on behalf of all the school and academy head teachers with whom I work for the excellent support, advice and guidance that you've provided and continue to provide. I'd like to ask a couple of questions, if I may, about the engagement and progress of secondary school pupils over the first half of this academic year. In the first instance, do we have a clear picture of the number of hours per week for which pupils have engaged with their remote learning offer across the schools? And if so, what have the variations looked like and what can be learnt from this? And secondly, what can we say about secondary schools' internal pupil achievement data about the progress made by different cohorts of students over the first half of this year?
Okay, well, obviously, as a local authority, we only have 2 of the 15 secondary schools that are maintained in the maintained sector. So it's quite hard to comment specifically about that, and they're all obviously working on different systems and working it through. My perceived view from the conversations I've had with them is that there is a clear variation. We've had challenges engaging some pupils. Others have thrived, and we continue to support their needs and their outcomes. And I think what's going to be really important when students return is actually how much that learning, when it happened at home, if they've done the hours, fine, but has it been embedded? Are there gaps we need to go back, particularly in the younger age groups in secondary school, to make sure that when they reinforce them with more detailed learning and developing their thoughts and ideas, that they've got the context and background in place. So I don't have that picture. We haven't collected that, but certainly my perception is that schools are very on top of that and have been monitoring throughout who's accessing. But we will definitely have to do that baselining when children return. And I think that supports the second part of your question around what has been pupil progress. We've been having lots and lots of conversations about how we oversee the transition between year 6 and year 7. And the majority of our secondary schools work with an organisation called Pixel, and they have been doing assessments and working through that process throughout this period. And obviously they will continue to monitor and look at those gaps. But we are concerned that as children come through to the next stage of their education, we know exactly what their needs are, and that's been the heavy focus about how do we, particularly on that transition point, understand those children's needs, be it social and emotional. So we're talking about doing some sort of behavioural reviews and questionnaires to support that need alongside their academic progress and gaps that they may have at that point. So it's something to evolve, and it's certainly something, if you're happy, I could go back and have further conversations with the secondary schools about maybe how we capture that and what the data might look like across those year groups.
That would be great. Thank you very much.
Councillor Over is offline.
Thank you, Councillor Aiken. Can we go to Councillor Nicola Day for the next question?
Yes, I'll get one of my colleagues to ring Councillor Over, who's obviously lost his internet connection. Yes, so at this moment in time, Councillor Coles as Vice Chair, if you just like to take over while we try and contact him. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Coles, I've just lowered my hand. It was raised from earlier. I don't have another question. So
it's Claire Watchall next, Councillor Coles.
Claire, yes. Claire, can we have your question?
Hi, yes, hi, John. In section 4.33, you talk about the increase in domestic abuse data that Operation Encompass have been notifying schools about. Unfortunately, I suppose if that trend continues, when schools fully open to all students next week, there may be an increase in concerns that schools will raise. I just wondered if there's any support, like additional support in place for schools if they're reporting those concerns to the council. And then I had another question. Shall I just ask you that now then? Yes. Yep. That was about, I think it was section 4.39 on page 102. You talk about the impact of virtual assessments, and you say that you plan to embrace new ways of working post-COVID. So that kind of indicates that there's been some positive benefits as a result of the change in working practices. So I just wondered what those were, and I suppose that's in line with when you talk about consultations with head teachers online are very well attended. Is that because they're online, and do you think they could be opened up to wider leadership in the future?
Okay, to deal with the Operation Encompass issue, so cases that are raised, as with any break in school, we always see a spike when they come back. So the summer holidays is always characterised by a set of issues that come through after that. We've just increased our capacity, appointed a new role into the MASH, so essentially the front door of social care, to support the additional needs that come through. Obviously, there is some filtering. Obviously, we go into school and cases emerge as we go forward. And Lou is not here today, but in his team, they're very aware and ready for this, and will be looking to support schools wherever we possibly can. Equally, our early help service will be supporting that as well. So we're well set up. We're expecting it, as we would always expect after a break, and we'll deal with it. I think the benefit we've got, though, is we've got some headlines here. We've got some ability to work ahead of the game, because the police have shared their information with us, and we can work with schools. We've notified schools, so they'll be putting that pastoral support in already straight away to deal with those concerns and those issues. In terms of working virtually, you picked a few areas there, which I think is really relevant, actually. And it's my teams are meeting with all my leadership team next week to talk about how we work differently going forward. Certainly the head teacher meetings. I did one on last Wednesday on the guidance that's come out. We had 430 people attend. When I look after 350 schools, we've done something quite well there. Somebody from North East Lincolnshire came, actually, so quite pleased to see that. So, but it is working, it is engaging. People aren't having to travel, and I think that's a positive side of it. The interaction actually is really good. We open up the chat, and I try and answer the questions at the same time I'm presenting, and you get this dialogue and flow, and it's really good. But extending it to the world of SEN, where we've been able to quickly do assessments. We can work with children. We can work with families. It's often not as challenging. Going into a school and having an assessment is quite a daunting thing for some families. Actually, being able to sit in their living room with a camera and have an assessment is a really positive way to go. Clearly, we can't do that with everything. There is a real need to sometimes work directly with families and play with children before we get the needs out. But it's certainly a way forward, and we will be embracing the use of technology, because it's made the ability for us to do more better. We are so limited on resources, and you've heard it from Dee, but actually we've delivered a huge amount with a tiny team because we can do virtual working. So I think it's a really good point, and certainly something we will be continuing.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, John.
Thank you very much, everyone. I think Councillor Over is back and resumed chair of the meeting.
Thanks a lot, Andy. Yeah, I don't know what happened there. I just froze and everything went blank, so I had to log on again. So we'll just continue. According to what I've got on my screen, I've got one more question, and that's from Councillor Skipstead.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I just had a quick question, John, about the results, the GCSEs. I know they weren't actual exams, but they are considerably better grades than when we normally take them. And I was wondering if you know why that is, and if there's something that can that be in some way fed into nationally. I mean, maybe in the old days they used to do teacher assessments before, and then now it's all exams. But maybe it's a good idea to have partially assessed by teachers as well. Is there anything you can do to feed that back to central government to change policy on that? Do you think it's a good idea? Just want to know what you think about that.
Okay, I think we'd all welcome a return to some element of coursework. And if we had coursework now, we'd be probably in a much better place to work it through. I'd like to think the results are better because we've been improving our schools and things are getting better all the time, which I'm very confident they are. I think teacher assessments are relevant. We have some challenging communities that we work with, and actually sometimes the daunting nature of an exam. We've talked about it in this committee before. English additional language is a big challenge around technical subjects. I often talk about maths, particularly at GCSE, how technical the language is, and actually it's not the pupil's ability, it's their ability to access the question rather than give the answer that causes a small challenge. So maybe when I write to the minister on behalf of Brian to try and get some money for Pupil Premium, we'll build that sort of feedback into that as well, and maybe ask if they can consider that as part of what we need to do.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot. There are no further questions. I'd like to note the recommendation in the report, which is for the committee to note the position of education around COVID-19 and wider activities, and comment on areas the committee may wish to review moving forward as we move into a recovery phase. Are the committee satisfied that we have done this? Please indicate by raising your virtual hand if you object. I can't see any objections, so the recommendation is agreed. Thanks a lot, Jonathan, for staying for such a long time and coming along right at the end. Your report was highly appreciated. Thanks a lot. Where am I? Yep, that's that. Agenda item 9. We'll now move on to the agenda, the forward plan of executive decisions on pages 1 to 48. Please note that there is a more recent version of the forward plan which was published on Friday the 28th of February 2021 and was emailed to committee members on Monday, and this is the version that we will be referring to for this meeting. Please refer to page numbers 1 to 42 of that document. Are there any items on the forward plan that the committee would wish to receive further information on? You can only, it says Chairman to advise the committee that they can only request information on items relating to this committee. Paulina, please note any requests. No. Okay. that is the end of the meeting. And this is the last scheduled meeting of the committee in this municipal year. And I'd like to thank everyone on the committee for their contribution to the work of the committee over the past 2 years. I'd also like to say thanks to all the officers who've contributed to the meetings, and thank you for any members of the public who've been watching today and in previous times. I'd like to close the meeting now at 9:02.